Good afternoon and welcome to the ISM Western New York Lunch and Learn webinar series. Our topic for today's discussion is creating resilience and sustainability, navigating the impact of tariffs and disruption. Please be sure to ask any questions using our chat or Q&A area. Tom will then answer the question during his presentation, or if you would like to see your question live, just raise your hand and we'll get to you as soon as possible to ask your question. And everybody will be receiving a copy of the recording, the slides, and your continuing education hour for attending us today. Our speaker for today will be Tom Cook, Managing Director of Blue Tiger International, an international business consultancy advising on supply chain management, trade compliance, purchasing, trade, and disruption management, global business, and logistics. Tom was the former CEO of American River International in New York and Apex Global Logistics Supply Chain Operation in Los Angeles. Tom has over 35 years of experience in assisting companies all over the world manage their import and export operations. He's a member of the New York District Export Council and serves on the board of directors of the National Association of District Export Councils and is the director of the National Institute of World Trade, which is a 30-year-old educational and training organization based in New York. Both Blue Tiger International and the National Institute of World Trade are strategic partners of the Department of Commerce. Tom has also authored over 20 books on global trade, and the latest book that recently just came out is Managing and Mitigating the Impact of Tariffs, Pandemics, and Trade Disruptions in the Global Supply Chain. So you're going to have quite a program today, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and always appreciate you putting this together and the work that you do for the ISM chapters. So again, my company, Blue Tiger International, we basically help companies navigate the challenges of global trade. We've been operating for more than 36 years now, and we obviously now are heavily focused into companies maintaining their resilience and sustainability and fighting and navigating the challenges of these global tariffs. We'll also spend a moment because customs is changing dramatically as well in the last 6 months, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that. As Kathy mentioned, you're welcome to jump in, and if you have a question or a comment or you want to challenge anything that I put out there, please feel free to do that as we navigate the slides. You don't have to wait to the end unless you want to. So we have to focus on what I would call the center point of a lot of what we refer to as chaos and disruption, unprecedented uncertainty. But we need to kind of put it in context, is that Trump has two primary goals in mind with all this craziness that's going on. Is he wants to create a balance of trade in the world that gives the United States a fair chance to compete. And what we're talking about here is that if you just took an example, if BMW manufactured one of their cars in Germany and exported to the United States, when it passes through the border, it's at a 2.5% duty rate. If General Motors wanted to sell a Camaro into Germany, when it crosses the border, the duty rate is 17.5% rate. And that inequity exists all over the world, okay? And Trump is making the point that if we're helping you militarily, we're helping you politically, we're helping you economically, why are you treating our sales into your country with such high tariffs? So he's forcing them by increasing tariffs on imports from their countries in trying to get reciprocity on their side. The second goal he has is he wants circumstances where, if, let's say, a company or the country of Philippines was going to spend, $5 billion on farm equipment, that they want them to buy it from John Deere here in the United States rather than going to a company in China or wherever else that is manufactured. And he wants more companies from foreign sources to invest in the United States and put plants here and so forth are part of the goals, along with increasing the amount of manufacturing of products taking place here in the United States. Most of us in the supply chain would agree that the goals are meritorious, but it's Trump's process that he's using, which is really causing all this chaos and disruption. Okay. So I'm going to frame the issues as we go along here, but really the big focus is on what the solutions are, because while most companies are stymied and feel a high degree of despair, okay, there really are practical things that can be done. And sometimes it's not one answer, it's the combination of several answers that help you. You'll never eliminate it, but you can mitigate it significantly. Most of our solutions we've been utilizing for more than 30 years. We started out with two or three when we first started this challenge, and we're up to now 20, and we're working on two more to make it 22 that we're beta testing as we speak. So we're going to present some of these to you as we go through this. When we look at general trade, import and export activity, and where companies have interest overseas or foreign companies that do business here in the United States, there are always issues that are around geopolitical circumstances, economic issues, wars and terrorism that we've seen, the ones that came out of the Middle East recently, the Ukraine-Russia war, and the threats of war that we have. Obviously, everybody's very concerned with the fact that China wants to take back Taiwan, and that's a serious threat that's being watched very carefully and also impacting trade to a greater extent. Weather issues, hazards of international shipping, bad players in international trade, and U.S. customs themselves here in the United States impacting imports, but also when we sell goods overseas, their counterparts in the countries that we ship to. A lot of us also have very strict chain of custody issues in our goods moving around the world, particularly in the food, pharma, medical products field, and so forth. And these are being challenged now based upon what's going on in the world trade. It threatens trade, it threatens margins, it threatens resilience and sustainability in companies. And adding to this whole problem related to trade and tariffs is the fact that president is changing how customs operates here in the United States. So three key areas that everybody involved in supply chain and also in senior management in companies need to think about is that the companies that are succeeding, and there are some companies that are not only succeeding but doing better in these challenging times, are the ones that have the ability to pivot quickly, meaning that they can shift from one country to another for sourcing, or they could shift quickly from one transportation company to another. All of a sudden shift manufacturing over here, okay, or change their product by tariff engineering their product and altering it so it's not impacted. As we all know, Trump has gone after steel, copper, and aluminum included in derivatives, which means if it's part of a product, right? But by adding maybe a composite material instead of steel might allow the product to work, okay? So things like that, and the ability for a company to change its supply chain so it's not so impacted by the changes that are happening. The ability to pivot quickly is directly determined by our ability to develop resources and having an information flow, such as in this webinar that we're having here, so that we're aware of what options might exist and then to see how they could potentially be applied into our supply chain. And lastly is just the idea of being creative and being diligent on the solutions that are available. So when we look at these solutions, the 20 that we have, foreign trade zones, bonded warehouses, tariff engineering, drawback, freight consolidation, demand planning, intensive operations training and resources. This webinar given by ISM is part of that. The ability to do direct shipping, alternative and near sourcing, the choice of the Incoterm that's used, ex-work, CIF, DDP, the utilization of technology and import and export, and particularly now with technology is the use of AI. Free trade agreements. We still have several free trade agreements in place around the world. Others are being modified. Where we do and how we do our warehousing and distribution. The ability to do comprehensive, robust landed cost modeling. I'll spend some time on that in a moment. robust supply chain assessments, really taking very introspective looks on how we do what we do in our supply chain and to see where betterments or changes can be made. Bringing in guidance and expertise. There are a lot of consulting firms, a lot of areas and individuals who have expertise that you can bring into your organization. There's a first sale rule, which I'll talk about. Altering the harmonized tariff number that you're using in your products being imported and exported, the ability to bring in parts versus finished products, and the use of a domestic intermediary in your import transactions. So how we navigate any of these solutions is by us first creating what we refer to as a landed cost model. This landed cost model that's on the picture is looking at an import transaction. And what we do and what we've learned to do over the last 30 years plus is that these areas or silos of the import process, acquisition cost, freight, customs clearance, duty and taxes, warehousing and fulfillment, distribution, we recognize that all these areas are separate and distinct, but part of the whole overall supply chain. And when we look at it as separate and distinct, we can see within those silos where there's an opportunity to reduce risk and spend. The acquisition cost is the price that we pay for the merchandise. And most people in procurement and in purchasing, they focus on that acquisition cost. And we would take the argument that you really need to look at the landed cost when making an acquisition of product or materials or components overseas, because it's the landed cost which really is the bottom line expense that the company has that's associated with that transaction. You have the freight moving it from overseas here to the United States. And as we know, we have lots of options with freight. We have ocean freight, which is a longer term time period of transit. And we have air freight, which is a more expedited means of transit, but is a lot more expensive. We have the customs clearance process that has costs associated with it. We have duties and taxes, which is our obligations, and that's really what Trump is navigating and using to change basically how international trade is operating. And then we have the inland freight, fulfillment, warehousing, distribution, which is what we refer to sometimes as last mile obligations. Again, siloing these 5 areas enables us to more introspectively look at each one, okay, in its own right, and decide where we might be able to make changes that impact risk and cost. From that model, what we've developed is this 4-step process, and we recommend that all companies that look at themselves introspectively do the same thing. The first is what we refer to as intellectual assessment of how a supply chain operates. Where are we buying from? Where are we selling to? How much are we moving? How are we moving these goods? Okay. What's the cost of moving the goods, siloing it in that landed cost model, and so forth. Okay. From that assessment, intellectually, we can make recommendations. Okay. On where there's opportunities for improvement. The most easiest one to look at is that, well, if a company is using a significant amount of air freight, which is 18 times more expensive than ocean freight, looking at it on a per kilo or per cubic meter basis, okay, is that if we move things to more ocean freight, if that was possible, we would have savings in one of those silos and thereby mitigating the impact of these increased tariffs. So we create recommendations, and from that, we create a financial model. The assessment, which is done intellectually, the recommendations, is more of an intellectual perspective, or what we call qualitative assessment. Okay. Moving it into a financial model is quantitative. We're now going to measure what the costs are associated with any of those recommendations and what's the ROI. What are we going to get back for it to make sure that it makes sense to move in that direction? Those 2 steps can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks when we look at this whole process. And this whole process could take anywhere from 3 to 4 months. The operational model is the part that takes the longest, which answers the question, what does the company have to do differently in order to make one of these recommendations work? Okay. What do they have to organize differently in their sales, customer service, purchasing, operations, logistics, and so forth to make it happen? And that process could take 2 months to go through in order to get to the bottom line. Once we're through steps one, two, and three, implementation is working with the parties that are involved in making the actual recommendation happen. And a lot of times those are government agencies such as the Department of Commerce, Foreign Trade Zone Board, U.S. Customs, and various other government agencies that might be involved.
Hey, Tom, we
Yep,
have one question.
sure.
Have you implemented any technology solutions, including AI, to increase the speed or accuracy of this process?
If we're referring to the process of what I'm talking about, this four-step process and using AI for that, if he or she can answer that question, you're talking about this process or just in processes and supply chain in general?
Okay, just waiting for Elena to answer. In any step of your process.
Yes, so the answer is yes, and we're going through our own learning curve here. But in the assessment phase, we're taking a deep dive into the supply chain. So we're looking at all kinds of things such as, we're first of all interviewing everybody in the supply chain. That takes some time. But more importantly, we're looking at documentation. If you're importing and exporting, everybody knows there's a lot of documentation there. So a manual review of documentation is a timely process. So what we're doing is we're sliding the documentation into a record keeping function for us. And from that record keeping function, we're surveilling the equipment using AI. And what normally would take if one person in a day can look at maybe 20 files, AI could look at 2,000 files in that same time frame, okay, and come out with trends that would be important to us in making the decisions and the recommendations that we would make. So AI is clearly being used in that assessment phase, okay? We don't have it really utilized yet in the operational model, but one of the things that we do is I'm going to talk about it in a few moments, is the use of foreign trade zones, particularly in manufacturing. And so we have to quantify and identify the operation in detail of goods coming into a manufacturing location, their work in process, and then the final product. And we are now experimenting utilizing AI to evaluate that process more quickly and more rapidly at a more detailed level than we normally would, which then is presented to the Foreign Trade Zone Board and U.S. Customs to give them the detail they need to approve that activation facility. So we're experimenting with that side of it currently. Okay, so the focus in this slide here is the one about foreign trade zones. Okay, and if you look at the column on the far right side in this slide, a foreign trade zone holds goods indefinitely without requiring customs clearance. It's able to do that because when a location, whether it's just warehousing and distribution or also including manufacturing, when that location is given FTZ activation, it is physically located in the United States, but it sits outside U.S. economy. And therefore, when goods move through the border into an FTZ, there's no obligation to do a customs clearance and therefore no obligation to pay duty and taxes. It's only when it exits the facility is that obligation due. And if the goods get exported from the United States, and the example would be that you have a lot of companies that will distribute from the United States to Mexico and Canada, manufacture products that ultimately go to Canada or Mexico or Caribbean or exported anywhere. Any goods that are exported in FTZ, there's no obligation to pay duty because those goods would never have entered the U.S. economy. So FTZ is at the top of the list of the potential benefits that companies can get in looking at this as an option in mitigating tariff obligations. And we've been doing them since the early 1990s. There are reductions in the clearance costs because what happens is is that customs in an FTZ doesn't look for transactional customs clearances. They allow you to look at a whole week in a manifest basis. So what they say is that take all your activity that you have out of the FTZ on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. 6 o'clock on Friday night, you close out, and all the activity that happened that week gets submitted in one customs clearance. So you pay only one customs clearance versus maybe 50 or 60. And also your merchandise processing fee, which caps out at around $600 now for a high value transaction. And you really move it from 50 times the 600 to only one times the 600 when using a foreign trade zone. A foreign trade zone allows manipulation, assembly, and manufacturing. Okay. So you can take in raw materials and components, okay, and manufacture it into a different product. Up until just a few months ago, okay, we used to also get what's called a tariff inversion benefit, which means that raw materials, parts, and components come in at one HTS number and one duty rate, but the finished product might come in at a different HTS number and a lower duty rate. It gives you the option to use that lower duty rate. Trump, back in August, has temporarily suspended that benefit in a foreign trade zone. The word that we've gotten from the Department of Commerce is that once Trump finishes this negotiation with the world on all these tariff agreements, I appreciate that more than 100 countries have lined up to negotiate with the president, and about 50 companies now, there's been agreements put in place or are almost ready to be put in place. So when that is done, we're expected to be probably by the end of the summer. Okay. We're supposed to get that benefit back. Um, the Department of Commerce, Foreign Trade Zone Board, and U.S. Customs are the government agencies that have oversight of FTZ, and foreign trade zones are almost allowed anywhere in the United States. Okay, we currently operate now in about 22 states, but there are other states that have already got foreign trade zones, or ones that we're just not working in, but there are foreign trade zone activity in those locations. So to kind of put this in perspective, these solutions, I've pulled out a few of those. So if we have a Baltimore-based fuel company, and these are real cases, imports $100 million of raw petroleum products, it can hold the products up to 9 months before the sale. So we're taking a look at the picture. We created an FTZ at their terminal. So their cost in operating that FTZ, most of that cost are related to security upgrades and technology upgrades, but they are getting an ROI of $3.4 million annually. And generally, there's an increase every year of the financial benefits because most of the costs are just in the first year, maybe the second year, and they kind of dwindle out as time goes on. Customs has a regulation which is called the first sale. The first sale says that if you are a importer and you buy from a foreign supplier, and let's just take China, where a lot of our imports come from, and you're buying from a manufacturer, but in fact that there's an intermediary, a buying or a selling agent between you and the factory. And we did a study on this about 5 years ago, and we determined that about 60%, particularly related to China, of imports from China are made through a buying or a selling agent. So it's pretty high. Customs says that all they're concerned about is that what you paid to the factory is the amount that you declare to customs, not the amount that includes the commission or fee to that third party buying or selling agent. Okay, so this has proved very advantageous. You have to evidence to customs that there is that intermediary involved. But once you're able to do that, you can take advantage of that. But like all things, Trump is actually targeting this particular benefit. And as of today, it's still remaining, but it remains to be seen how long it will be. So in this particular example, a company that we're working with paid to a supplier, um, in this case, 155,000 commission to the buying agent, okay, which was 10%. So they're paying $155,000 for one transaction, okay, but 10% of that amount is for the benefit of the buying agent. So that allows them to distract from that amount and only declare to customs the 139,000 that's left over. In this particular case, this product that's coming in is at a 50% duty rate. Okay. So the savings per transaction is $7,500. And annually, where they have about 30 shipments of this coming in, there's about $232,000 of savings. Okay. Which is a pretty good size number. Tariff engineering is now one of our most often solutions that we find. And tariff engineering is what we refer to as the legitimate manipulation, the legitimate changing of a product, of how it's made, in order to change the HTS number and get a lower duty rate. So where this has a lot of interest today is the fact that Trump has put duties going from 25 to 50% surcharges on anything that's steel, aluminum, or copper. And he includes it not only as its own product, steel, aluminum, copper, but if it's within the manufacturing material used in a particular product, and he calls it derivatives. Okay. So if we have steel, aluminum, or copper used in the manufacturing of a product made overseas, when it comes in, we have to show a bill of materials itemizing what those values are and pay a surcharge against those values. So I have engineers on our team, and what they do is they work with the engineers of our clients and their suppliers to see whether or not a different material than steel, aluminum, and copper that can be used. So composite materials are now very big growth area, have a high degree of advantages attached to it, one being high tensile strength, okay, comparative to some of the metals, okay, but doesn't have copper, steel, or aluminum in it. So a composite replacing a piece of steel or aluminum or copper within a piece of equipment can be used very successfully, and therefore no surcharge would apply. So we're doing this very aggressively now with a lot of companies that buy parts and components and fully completed machinery from overseas being impacted by the steel, copper, and aluminum initiative of Trump. What Trump is trying to do with those particular things is forcing the development of those industries here in the United States, where we do have significant amount of iron ore, which goes into steel, copper, and aluminum within our own country. Demand planning, expedited freight review. So we have a client that we look at, and in this case, this thing says that when we ship goods, that one silo of freight, when we ship those goods from overseas to the United States or from the United States to overseas, okay, and we have the choice generally of air or ocean. If it's Mexico or Canada, we can add truck and rail into that mix. But in the majority where it's going internationally to a country where ocean and air are the primary means of moving it, okay, air freight is 18 times more expensive than ocean freight when you look at it as a per kilo or per cubic meter basis. Okay. Um, so we looked at a company, okay, that was down in Texas. Okay. The importer had a spend pretty significant of $83 million. Okay. They're a Fortune 500 company, annually, of which 40% was utilized for expedited air freight shipping. We just went to their payables department and said, let us have a listing of all your payables to your transportation companies. And from that, we were able to clearly determine that 40% of their spend was in that area. But when we looked at the reasons why that expedited was used, it had to do directly with the demand planning process not working correctly. And they had many times over where shipments had to be expedited from overseas because the factories and the suppliers overseas did not get the order in time, or changes were made that didn't come through, and then things had to be adjusted before they were shipped from the supplier. So we were able to determine that in this particular case, the main reason for increased expedite air freight was the poor demanding planning in their operations. So we brought in a technology into their operation, which cost them approximately $90,000, but we reduced their freight spend by $15 million annually, okay, which is obviously a very huge number, by just making changes in the demand planning process and utilizing technology. And case advances, we are in this particular case using AI in their technology to help us predict demand, okay, because AI can analyze a lot of historical factors, a vast amount, and also look at a lot of the predictive data that we put into the formula, okay, and come up with a much what I call tighter, cleaner demand planning process. So one of the things that Trump is trying to do is to bring back manufacturing to the United States, or closer to the United States, or to friendlier countries. So we can group in alternative near sourcing to three categories. Friendshoring is moving the goods from a foreign country that we might have some hostility with or some concerns with as a supplier. China would be the perfect example of that currently, okay? And moving it to a country that we have a much more friendly relationship with. Specifically, if we talk about China, examples would be Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, South Korea, Philippines, Indonesia, and India would be examples of more friendlier countries that we might move some of that manufacturing to. Nearshoring is bringing it physically, the manufacturing or assembly process closer to the United States, Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, certain Central American countries would be examples of that. Reshoring is bringing the manufacturing back to the United States. And that's much more easily said than accomplished, mainly because of the labor market we have in the United States. We don't have a vast amount of blue collar skilled labor. We also have a circumstance since President has become, since President Trump has taken office, which he's sending back a tremendous amount of illegal aliens. We obviously want him to send back the ones that are criminals, convicts, bad guys, and so forth. But in that mix, there's a lot of collateral damage where they're sending back people who may have been here illegally for 20 years, but have a family, have a business, have a structure in place, been paying taxes. They're good guys, and from that depletion, we've lost a lot of people that normally would work in a lot of areas, in farming and produce, in distribution, in the hospitality area, but also in manufacturing as well. So reshoring is a great idea, but the labor issue becomes part of the difficulty. The foreign trade zone model that I brought up just a little while ago is a perfect solution for the reshoring option. And we probably have maybe 40 to 45 engagements that we have going on. Probably half are related to a manufacturing leaving China or other countries and coming back to the United States through a foreign trade zone model. So in this case, we had a company in New Jersey, which was food oil additive. They were buying from China. They saw tariff increases go from 15, 25 to 50%. Okay. We found an alternative supplier in a Mexican maquiladora contract manufacturing location. The acquisition cost was 7% higher, meaning that in those 5 silos acquisition cost, it was 7% higher in the acquisition cost, but the landed cost, meaning the other costs, customs clearance, duties, and so forth, made it substantially less. Okay. And it was also savings in oversight, travel, and lead times here. Okay. So it made a huge difference, okay, in that company. So it in this scenario here, you have a circumstance um, in the Maquiladora program. So the Maquiladora program is a swath of land that goes from Tijuana, just south of San Diego, all the way through to Texas, okay, in which that 50-mile swath of land, if they develop factories or assembly locations or manufacturing in that area and they qualify to become maquiladora, the maquiladora can gain advantage by importing parts and components and raw materials. And when they go into the maquiladora factory, there's no obligation to pay duties on it. It now gets manufactured into a finished product. And when that finished product comes into the United States, okay, um, there's no duty or obligation on it because of the USMCA agreement. So the maquiladora program in Mexico is actually a duty elimination program. Okay. So it makes for a big difference in companies when they go down that path. As a statistic, about 60% of the Fortune 1000 companies in the United States have a direct or an indirect interest in the Mexican maquiladora. Another option is the use of a domestic intermediary where a foreign manufacturer, and we appreciate that a lot of companies here in the United States are subsidiaries of foreign manufacturers, okay? But they have a US-based sales office, maintenance, or repair location. Transfer pricing to the USA intermediary and they take the sale domestically helps reduce the landed costs. So in this particular case study, we had a company that was based in Italy. They had a US office that was just handling sales and customer service. They had a 42% markup in their sale. When the sale was made, the goods were sold directly from the Italian manufacturing location directly to the US customer. And therefore, the price declared to US Customs was that sales price, and that sales price included the 42% of profit. So what we changed was to create the sale going to the US subsidiary, having a transfer price, lowering it by 42% because you can evidence that in your transaction. Okay. And in this particular case, they were saving close to annually $17 million in doing that against the increased IRS tax obligation for the US subsidiary of $2.5 million, or net savings of $14.5 million. So the use of just changing it to a transfer from parent to a subsidiary, okay, was the solution in this case. And there are a lot of foreign companies that operate in the United States through subsidiaries. So, as I kind of indicated earlier, somebody very smart and knows how supply chains work is whispering in Trump's ears. He obviously doesn't know this information himself because he's not an importer or an exporter. Okay. And he has been told that a lot of importers in the United States don't correctly use the right HTS number, the harmonized tariff number, don't show the right origin, okay, or don't show the right valuation, and therefore they're paying a lower duty rate or no duty rate at all into U.S. customs. So he has now decided that that means that the U.S. Treasury is not getting the amount of money that it should. And they're estimating it that it's in the neighborhood of as much as $400 billion of money that could be received that isn't. So in 1993 was a period of time where Customs created what was called the Customs Modernization Act, which was ratified by Congress. Congress has oversight over customs. And in that change in the law, which had no major changes had been made to customs law going all the way back to 1930. So when they made all these changes, updating things to the new state of art of transportation, logistics, and supply chain, they decided to change the names of the enforcement offices and customs to trade facilitators, meaning that they're working with importers and exporters and helping them facilitate their trade cost effectively and compliantly. Okay. Um, but Trump has changed that. And he, through an executive order, has now named them as agents of enforcement for U.S. Treasury and the Department of Homeland Security. And he's actually created a task force of attorneys working for the Department of Justice as a task force working with U.S. Customs and Department of Homeland Security to determine where fraud is being committed and to aggressively go after those companies. This came up in August, and since August to now, we've seen probably as many as 14 to 17 cases come in, which were normally small issues. Customs would give a hand slap to the company for any kind of problem, but now are much more aggressively chasing for these companies to see if there's fraud. And fraud will be determined by the nature of how egregious, willful, and intentional the action was. And appreciate that they can get copies of emails, they can take over computers to see what was communicated between you and your suppliers and so forth as places for evidence on what was the culture involved with that change. So the culture of the agents has been changed significantly, and Trump is adding as much as 30% more enforcement officers working on all the major gateways here in the United States. And we mentioned AI earlier, and they're also using AI much more aggressively. Appreciate the fact that in every import, there's a transaction. And in every import, there's a transaction, meaning that we see who is the exporter overseas, how it was brought to the United States. We get to see what value is declared, HTS origin through the documentation. Okay. And we had a case come into us which proves this point about the use of AI. The company was based up in Boston, and they imported automobile parts from a Chinese company. But they also had an operation that was based in Sydney, Australia. Um, and that Sydney, Australia company imported auto parts as well from China. So this company for the last 10 years has had the same kind of volume of shipments, the same types of products coming in on a regular pattern every month. Customs sees that through AI. This company up in Boston made a decision egregiously to move the freight to Australia, have it repacked, remarked, relabeled, and shipped from Australia as if it came from Australia. And that changed the duty rate from 50% to 15%. In a random audit, okay, and the use of AI, and where the AI came up is the AI said to customs offices, hey, for 10 years, they've been buying this same stuff from China monthly. And we're looking at this now. We see 6 months where the same product, the same values are coming from Australia. And therefore, you need to do checking. And it just so happened that there was a random check. The customs offices have insight into their systems. They saw that this company was being looked at, opened up the boxes, pulled the shipment, opened up the boxes, and saw that, in fact, these goods were made in China. Okay. Now this company in Boston is being pursued aggressively. And what we're trying to prevent from happening, because we're in the middle of this case, is prevent it from moving from a commercial case to moving it to a criminal case. Okay. Because it was clearly done egregiously, willfully, and intentionally. And Customs has now copies of the communications between the company in Boston and its company in Australia and the supplier in China. So it's a big issue. Everybody who's listening and on this call, you've got to tighten up on your compliance with your import business. Okay, so kind of putting this in context, if we want to be resilient, we got to be able to pivot, okay? And we have to find solutions to mitigate the impact of tariffs. Companies can't sustainable pay some of these higher duties okay, without lowering that additional cost. Always appreciate that the culture comes from the top in an organization. So for those of you that are operating in the middle management level, you need to move this information up the chain in order to really facilitate change. We refer to this as risk management in the global supply chain. Okay. All these solutions have application. We've had a lot of success with them. And probably, if not one, there'll probably be several that can be applied to your supply chains. And lastly, from a risk management concept, one of the things that we always take position with people, particularly in supply chain and more particularly in procurement and logistics, is to stop chase cost. And the risk management way of looking at this is really obtaining the best value for your spend. And the reason we say that is when we chase cost and we beat up a supplier, or we beat up a vendor, okay, then they're likely to see where they can make changes, okay, in reducing the quality of the service in order to keep their margin where they need it to be. So obtaining the best value for your spend is a much more better culturally mindset in creating resilience and sustainability in a company. Well, we've noticed since COVID that the elevation of the supply chain and the supply chain manager in all business models, and this is good because it's increased salaries. There are now people in supply chain who are part of the C-suite. We see a lot more companies with chief supply chain officer, and people in the supply chain are now at the front end of the discussion and not just at the rear end of application. Okay, and we think this just raises the whole bar and importance of supply chain, which we all benefit from. So all these challenges and risks comes with opportunity for those who seek to find solutions, see success and opportunity where others see only problems and despair, diligence, persuasiveness, against the creativity of managing the chaos and the disruption that Trump has put forth. So with that, I'll respond to any more questions or comments or challenges that anybody has. We have about 6 to 7 minutes left.
Oh, yes. If anybody has any questions or comments, please put them in the chat for Tom, or if you'd like to ask him a question live, just raise your hand and we can have you ask him a question. I do appreciate you, Tom, for this comprehensive presentation. Very important topic. As always, you always keep us on the forefront.
Understood.
Okay. At this point, I'm not seeing any questions in our chat, but I will be sending out the slides and a copy of the recording today. And again, our next presentation will be on March 10th. So at this point, I'll close out the recording, and I want to thank everybody and thank you, Tom, for joining us today.
You're welcome. And people have my contact information. If you have a question after the fact, you're more than welcome to reach out. No cost or obligations.
Oh,
Everybody be safe, be well.
thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody.